Who said a hello?
Kelly, I said hello.
Hey, what's up, Kelly? How you doing?
Good, good. Okay, so we'll just jump
I
right
only have a
in.
few friends, but just want to make sure I still know who my friends are.
Oh, my friend, we're all here to work together, my friend.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what it's
We
about.
all still love your dog.
I bet you I do. All right, all jokes aside,
Okay.
right? Every time I meet somebody with a dog, like I only recognize their dog name. I don't even recognize their name. Like they would tell me like, hey, I'm such and such. Here's my dog, Lucy. And I see them be like, hey, Lucy. It's like, oh, that's my dog. Oh, my bad. But it's interesting when you own a dog. Yeah. Like, you don't remember me? I actually don't. I remember your dog name.
Over and over again. Like, we don't walk around saying like, hey, Jenny, like, I don't, but you do to the dog, they say the dog's name. Hey, Lucy, come here. Lucy, Lucy, like, if we did that with each other, it'd be a lot easier.
That's pretty cool.
Right, okay. All right, so let's get started. Just jumping right into the agenda. Welcome everyone to the Common Council Caucus Monday, July 20th, prior to our main meeting. Just for the record, members present: Anani, Ballerin, Doche, Farrell, Flynn, Hoey, Igo, Johnson, myself, Love, and O'Brien. The other members will not be with us. Mr. Conti's not here. Robinson's not in. Ms.
Frederick's here.
Who's here?
Frederick, Sonia.
Did I miss you? Yep,
Yeah.
I don't have you. Okay, Ms. Fredericks, my apologies. Okay, we also have our clerk, Daniel Gillespie, Senior Legislative Aide, Michelle Andre, Research Counsel, Gia Pitardo, and Corp Counsel, Brett Williams. On the agenda for approval of meetings from previous meeting, we have the July 6th meeting minutes. Judy and Michelle, you worked through that issue, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So that was the only issue we had. So we'll be offering July 6th meeting minutes. Next on to consideration of vetoes. On Friday, we got the veto message from the mayor for ordinance 1581-19. So that was a veto. Moving on to consideration of ordinances. We have 137220 by Mr. Anani from our previous caucus. It's going to the General Services Committee for further discussion. That'll be an intro. Also an introduction by Mr. Anani, ordinance 147220, and that will be going to the General Services Committee also. One's a tree and vegetation planning, and the other is a solid waste ordinance, both going to General Services. Okay. On to consideration of resolutions. Resolution 687220R by Ms. Farrell will be going to finance. Just for introduction. Next, 3 resolutions by Ms. Fahey on behalf of planning would be 697220R, 707220R, and 717220R. They're reappointments of Andre Lake, Peter Sheehan, and Tina Lieberman, all respectively to Sustainability Advisory Committee. They will be a referral to the Planning Committee. We'll have them appear and update us and give us their thoughts about their service on that committee. Just jumping back on our active calendar, we had Mr. O'Brien's resolution, which is still in committee. and there's gonna
Yes.
be some language changes. You're gonna work on something.
Yeah. I sent some language changes out to the members of the committee and the council leadership. And maybe when Kathy schedules the meeting to review the sustainability committee members, maybe they could just review my changes, which I tried to make consistent with the discussion that we had. And I'm open to suggestions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Also, jumping back, we're supposed to be withdrawing, or Mr. Nani, you're withdrawing local law G. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd like to withdraw local law G.
Okay, during the meeting, I will withdraw that. So that's it for the agenda. Still have a little bit of time. I mean, we could talk about the veto message or any other issues that members may. Mr. O'Brien.
I got a question on the veto message. A couple of those points were the same points that the mayor made back when we had the blood plasma one, and then of course we corrected them. And the ones that I can particularly think of are that any amendment to our USDO requires a referral to the county planning board. So so that's got to be done. And then it requires a seeker statement. So I don't know, I guess they should just, maybe Corp Council can make sure that those things are done, because otherwise we're gonna have to do an additional meeting to have them done. And I mean, they're standard, as I understand, for any amendment to the USDO. Otherwise, we're gonna get it kicked back to us every time.
Okay,
Mike, quick question. So are you saying that that responsibility is for Corp Council, not from council members?
Well,
Our council?
it should be, I mean, it should be a shared responsibility, but it should be, well, it should be something that everybody should remember, because I know Hyde Clark sent a note to me stating, remind everybody that that's required for every USDO amendment. So I'm kind of saying it's required for every USDO amendment. And if we don't put it in, apparently we're going to have to do a redo. Not that a redo is all that involved. I mean, I know I made those same mistakes with the blood plasma ordinance, and JR graciously corrected them all for me. It's just something that we have to be alert for.
yeah, so just real quick, first, JR, I'd like you to weigh in as our research counsel, then Brett, and Judy, I see you after Brett. Okay.
Do you want me to weigh in now, or do you want the, because I see a couple members have their hands up right now.
Well, I know Judy had her hand up.
I see it's Farrell, Hoey, Judy, and Johnson that have their hands up on my end.
I don't want to speak on this, so when the discussion's done, maybe just remember to, I want to say a few things.
Okay. In terms of the veto message, the only times that something needs to be referred to the county planning board is under section 239M of the general municipal law, which states in part, if you're doing an amendment to the zoning comprehensive plan, or something that is within, and then after that, if it's within 500 feet within a property of the state, county, which include roads, like, for example, if it involves like Clinton Avenue, Henry Johnson Boulevard, Broadway, or 787, 87, then it triggers an automatic referral. In particular, in certain wards that have, like, for example, SUNY, if any of the properties being worked on there are within 500 feet of like SUNY property, then that triggers an automatic referral to the county planning board as well. On that note, and the other points of the veto message, the seeker, in terms of the seeker, it's an unlisted action, so it doesn't require it doesn't require a seeker determination. It's not that it doesn't require a seeker determination, but there's nothing to result in an environmental impact. Same thing as with Judy's ordinance as well. There's no environmental impact, so there's no seeker requirement on that one. And in terms of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the USDO, yes, there is language in the USDO that requires that we have to make our decisions based on several criteria. That has never translated into how our legislation is done. From the administration or from planning, nothing. It just usually comes in, goes on our memorandum of support, and we go from there. Going forward, we'll look into making sure that our memorandum of support will have those criteria in it. But most of the time when something comes even from the planning board, it's boilerplate language that says it's, fits the comprehensive plan. It doesn't have no impact on the environment. There's really not much that has changed that when it comes to us from the planning department.
And Brett from Corporation Counsel, you agree?
Well, so, speaking broadly to the points that were made, it sounds like there's sort of a request or a feeling that the process be a little more front-loaded as far as taking care of these issues. I think that's what Councilmember O'Brien was getting at, was getting these things out of the way, ahead of time. And that's probably a good strategy to make sure these boxes are checked as early as possible. So, that's something on our end, and I'll work with JR and with council members and with other people in my office to work on getting those things taken care of in advance. Amy Levine in my office is obviously the one who is more heavily involved with the planning board side of things than I am, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to speak with her between when we got the veto message on Friday and today. But just generally speaking, specifically with regard to seeker, even if it is an unlisted action, there are still certain steps that need to be taken. It doesn't, since it's an unlisted action that wouldn't really have any negative environmental impacts, it's a much less involved process, but you still have to make a negative declaration and things like that. So there are some procedural steps that still need to be taken. And otherwise I will defer to my colleague Amy, because she's been working a lot more closely on this than I have, and I'll be happy to talk to her as soon as possible and get back to the council on that.
Okay, Mr. O'Shea.
Unmute. So I was a little confused what Mike was saying needed to go to the county board, and it sounds like he's saying, people are saying any changes to the text of the USDO needs to go to the county board. So I've looked at the general municipal, as well as a result of the mayor's veto, I've looked at the general municipal law 239-M, and it has specific actions in there that need to go to the county board. If it meant that every single change to a zoning code needs to go to the county board, it could have clearly said that. But instead, it narrows it to makes it clear that you're talking about when you're impacting a particular parcel, when something is directed at a particular parcel. So my ordinance didn't go to the county board, and the mayor signed it. So we need to be clear and not arbitrary and capricious. We should be following the law, and making this additional hurdle and making work for the county board does not make any sense. When it is something that is generally going to be applied to any development property, development project that might come about, then I don't see that as being targeted as impacting any particular property. When something is being rezoned, that's a different thing. When you are going to change height and various provisions of a zone that abuts a particular property that is near a state property or county or another municipality. I can see that having to go to the county board. But to make a blanket statement that everything needs to go to the county board is contrary to rules of construction with regard to interpreting laws. If the statute meant that, then the statute would have said that. So the statute means something else than doing that. So I do think that it's worthwhile to make a determination early on with regard to what needs to be go to the county board. With regard to the seeker process, I will note, and I don't know if this happened with Tom Hoey or not, when I submitted my documentation to the planning board, they asked me to fill out some sort of form, very basic, like 10-question form, and I filled that out, and it really is not, it was very difficult to fill out because it's really meant to apply to a particular project. Now, the final thing is with regard to Tom Hoey's thing, I want to remind people that that particular ordinance is doing essentially nothing more than saying to the administration, when you impose conditions, you need to make sure those conditions are complied with. And also when there's no longer the seeking of a waiver of USDO requirements. Okay, so you have to comply with the USDO. That's not something that is some sort of huge thing that is going to have a huge impact on any of these state properties or county properties or municipalities, because essentially what we're saying, comply with the USDO and you don't get an exemption. Oh, and by the way, if you applied for an exception, you wouldn't necessarily get it. There's no guarantee that you would get it. So I'm having a lot of difficulty with both the rationale behind the mayor's veto message. I think that there's a certain arbitrariness and capriciousness here. When mine affected changes to the text of the USDO and Tom Hoey's did, and mine was signed by the mayor's and his is being vetoed because of some process kinds of issues. So I don't, essentially, I think we ought to be figuring out in advance what really needs to go to, and there needs to be some sort of conversation with Corporation Counsel's office and JR about what needs a seeker, what doesn't, what level of seeker, statement needs to be done, whether something really needs to go to the county board.
Thank you, Judy. JR, who'd you say was next?
Is O'Brien and then Hoey.
See if I'm muted. So I guess my question then is, do we have a consensus as to whether we can do an override tonight, conceivably, or without doing the steps, any of the steps outlined in the veto message? I mean, because I'm not arguing with Judy. She may be absolutely right.
Right. I think, and did someone else want to speak in there before I said something? No? Judy?
I just want to say, I think everything I said is also 100% consistent with what JR said regarding this.
Yeah,
so.
no, I
Yes,
because
it is.
in terms of the referral to the county planning board, if we have to refer everything to the county planning board, everything would be delayed because the county planning board only meets once or twice a month.
That's right.
And the
Once a
GML
month.
is very specific as to what is necessary. As a precaution, it would be good to just send everything to the county planning board, because if something is subject to the county planning board under that section of the law, then it's a jurisdictional defect and the courts can undo it. But again, the law is very specific as to what needs to go to the county.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happens that a lot of the things that we do in the city of Albany tends to go because we are the capital. We have so many state highways. We have so many state properties. So a lot of the things we do tend to go to the county.
So JR, do you have an opinion as to whether we could vote tonight?
According to the charter, from what the charter says, it's introduced tonight, and then we have 30 days after. There's a cooling period, so we don't vote on it tonight. The next available the next meeting, the first August meeting is when we can vote.
So if I recall the last time we did a veto override, Richard said that there was essentially some sort of notice of a motion to override made at this meeting so that it can be voted on at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a motion they referred to as placing the motion on the table, and then we vote on it the following meeting. So if that's who's gonna, Mr. Ballerin?
I would say is if a seeker clearance is only a one-page easy document to get done, since we're not going to vote on it today, if we can at least get that done, I think that would be a good step in the right direction, especially if it's the one page. And I'm not sure if it's already been done. If it has been done, it'd be good for us to be able to have that. But if it hasn't been done, if it can be done in the next 2 weeks, then I would say let's move forward and get that done as well.
The seeker application, the EAF, we did when Tom proposed it the first time, we filled it out. It was the full 10-page actually. We did the full EAF.
Okay, thank you.
I have my hand up.
Mr. Hoey, go ahead.
Sure. I did call the county planning board. They don't meet till August 20th, and that would be well beyond the 30 days that we get to do an override. My own feeling is, in talking to David Gallen, who called me with he had texted me, he says, do you have a few minutes to talk? I said, sure, I'm sure you got some really good news for me. So then he called me, and it wasn't good news. But he said it was not the content of the ordinance, but it was the procedure. But in talking with JR, I mean, we've done these, a lot. I feel we did everything that we were supposed to, and I would like to go with an override. And I could also go as far as maybe we should look at some other changes to the USDO and see if the same requirement that they're putting on me was done with other ordinances that passed. And I don't believe they have, but I'd like to go for an override though next meeting. Thank you.
So you will be introducing a motion for an override today, and we'll hold it to the next meeting. Correct, Mr. Hoey?
Yes, sir. So it'd be, Mr. President, I want to do a motion for an override.
Yes, and just get a second on that.
Okay.
And Tom, as far as you mentioning comparisons, that's what this dossier and our attorney is saying, that technically hers should have gone through the same process.
Yes.
But it didn't. So there's your example right there.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
And then that.
Actually, mine shouldn't have gone through the same process. Neither one of these need to go through that process.
Yes.
And if I can just clarify, he's not making the motion now and seconding it. I believe he is making a notice that at the next meeting he will be making a motion to override and putting that on the table. Maybe it's a motion to introduce in the same way that we introduce legislation. But if you make the motion to override at this,
you have to vote.
Right.
That's why I'm a little confused. I don't think it's a notice motion, because at the motion of the override, it's a motion to reconsider the ordinance that's been vetoed. That's what we did last time, and from what I've seen in previous minutes. That's why I'm a little confused as to what's this motion for a notice to override.
I was just saying that it wasn't quite a motion to override. in this. So what is the language you're saying that we use?
Motion to reintroduce.
Motion to reconsider the vetoed ordinance.
All right.
Okay, so Tom, you're gonna make that motion and then we'll just let it age until the next.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's no need for the motion to happen today. It happens at the next meeting, the motion to reconsider. That's why I'm trying to understand this notice portion that everybody's talking about.
Okay,
Well, Richard had us do it the last
Before,
time.
yeah, the last meeting. Yeah, we had to do it the previous meeting.
Where's Richard when you need him?
And then the next meeting, we voted on the
No,
next meeting.
I think you guys are probably getting the motion to discharge from committee to put it on the calendar then, because I don't recall a notice motion before.
Mike would have done it, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to recall whether I did whatever I was instructed to do. I thought I did a notice motion. I know we did not override it that same meeting.
That night, no, we did not. We did it the
yeah,
next
But
meeting.
I thought I did some sort of a notice that I was going to make a motion.
No, what happened is that per the charter, the city clerk introduces it to us at messages from the mayor, under messages of the mayor, and then it's put into our record. And then at the next meeting, it's then eligible for consideration of vetoes for the motion to reconsider.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Is there any way we could check the minutes from that meeting and just see?
That's what I'm working on. I'm trying to find a date.
Thank
So
you.
you can help with that. Do you
And
know?
before 7 o'clock, Jenny has her hand up.
I'll jump into
Hi.
Michelle and search the
So
general code.
there's just a couple of notices that I wanted to make. First of all, Judy had sent some questions out about the fourth quarter treasurer's report, and we will be having a finance committee meeting for the resolution that we're introducing tonight. So I think it's a great idea. I'm glad that we normally do that type of meeting for the fourth quarter thing. So we'll see if the treasurer and Mike Wheeler can come in to talk about those numbers for that. And I also just wanted to make sure everyone knew that that Michelle and JR are going on a much needed vacation for the rest of this week. So, so leave them alone for the next few days. And if there's anything that's an emergency, then you can reach out to Danielle.
Don't bother Danielle either.
Wait, JR.
But if you send anything to Danielle, you have to send like lunch with it. So.
Sounds to me like we all have to take off for the next 4 days.
That's fair. That's fine.
I second that one. Can we get a motion on the floor?
So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. But they will be back on Monday, so hopefully nothing pressing will happen in the meantime.
At risk of maybe regretting saying this, if anything pressing does pop up, I'm always here if anybody has any.
Oh, that's right.
Okay. Now we're all going to be coming up with stuff, Brett. And we'll leave you alone too. But thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And that's it.
Okay. I think that's it, right? It is now 7 o'clock. Then we'll switch to, it's now 7 o'clock, and we will be, welcome to our Albany Common Council meeting, Monday, July 20th, 2020. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Anani.
Present.
Valorant.
Here.
Dochette.
Present.
Fahey.
Here.
Farrell.
Here.
Flynn.
Here.
Frederick.
Here.
Hoey.
Here.
Igo.
Here.
Hold on.
Johnson.
Here.
Kimbrough.
Here.
Love. O'Brien,
Here.
Robinson. 13 members present, 2 absent.
Thank you. And can you put up our flag?
Yes,
Please.
sir. I sure will.
At this time. Thank you. Now, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? And after that, we'll have our moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now we'll move on to our next item of our agenda is our public comment period. During this period, Madam Clerk, do we have any people signed up for public comment?
Mr. President, we have 3 public comments that have been submitted and sent to us in writing. If you'd like for me to share them, they're very brief tonight.
Yes, please.
First comment is from Ulrich Milford, and his comment or her comment basically reads as follows. Are there any available funds to have a system in Albany, New York, similar to the Lynx NYC kiosks for people to make emergency calls, charge cell phones, access area maps, connect to Wi-Fi since libraries are closed? And that commenter resides in the city of Albany at 259 South Pearl Street. The next comment is submitted by Marlon Anderson of 214 Lark Street within the city of Albany. And it reads as follows. Community, with shootings becoming a daily occurrence in the city of Albany, rather than abdicating responsibility for public safety to citizens and citizen organization, it's time for the city and city hall to step up and do the jobs they are elected and paid to do. People are dying, blood is being shed daily, and the response of this city is to do nothing. That must end. The city and you so-called leaders must step up. Do the job you're being paid to do. It is time for a city-led and impounded office to address gun violence in the city of Albany with a city-appointed and empowered individual to lead it. It is time for a city-led task force to address the gun violence in the city. That will create a plan in the mode of the Albany 2030 plan that will make laws and changes that will address the violence and death. Simply put, it's your responsibility, and you as elected and paid leaders are failing in that responsibility. The next comment is from Alana Klein of 29 Glenwood Street. Her comment reads as follows. Mr. President and members of the council, as always, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Fundamentally, I don't have a problem with the basic premise to defund the police. And that is police officers should be doing police work and not social work. Police officers shouldn't be the point of contact for individuals with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, or unhealthy family structural issues. If these words sound familiar, there's a reason for that. This is verbatim what Chief Hawkins said at the press conference last month. The concept of defunding the police seems to be widely misunderstood. Are there people who want to abolish the police and or dissolve the departments? Yes. However, for the vast overwhelming majority of activists calling for defunding the police, they mean reallocating funding and resources towards social services, schools, and community resources. I personally am on the fence about it. I fully support defunding the police. However, with the presence of police being so standard in literally every community in the country, it's hard for me to imagine an alternative. One could look at Camden, New Jersey, They disbanded and re-imaged their police force. They are a city that's roughly 75% our size. You can also take a look at Minneapolis's plan as it unfolds. I think the training and retraining and use of force and de-escalation has proven ineffective, whether immediately or in the long haul. Granted, the repeal of 50A will help, so long as that information is taken into account during the recruitment and hiring process. But a more substantial step would be dissolving the APOU. To my recollection, I don't think I've ever commented on a budget issue, much less the full proposed budget. I can promise you that changes this year. I would like to see a cap in terms of either a certain dollar amount or, more appropriately, a percentage of the full budget that is spent on APD. Moreover, there have been numerous calls to ban the use of tear gas. As part of this, if we are not already, I think the public should be entitled to an itemized budget detailing the APD's budgetary requests and allotments. Lastly, I'm calling for joint meetings of the Public Safety and Finance Committee to be regularly scheduled throughout the year, once a month or every other month, with the presumption that they would meet more frequently during budget negotiations to discuss the budget for the APD and if it's the appropriate allocation for the general welfare of the community. Mr. President, that concludes our comments for this evening.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that concludes our public comment period for this week. Continuing on through our agenda, we have minutes from previous meetings. Mr. Kimbrough.
Yes, motion to approve meeting minutes from July 6th of 2020, council meeting.
Do you have a second on that motion?
I saw Madam Dochette hold her hand up. She seconded.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Minutes.
Aye.
Minutes approved. And excuse me, continuing on to consideration of local laws. Starting out with Mr. Anani.
Mr. Anani, you're still muted.
I would like to repeal local law G of 2020.
Withdraw.
Withdraw, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Anani. And the chair will continue to recognize Mr. Anani for local laws.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to introduce ordinance 137220.
Thank you, Mr. Anani. Sorry about that. Excuse me, I'm going back. I'm sorry. I had it written down. I don't know why. Before we do that, Mr. Anani, I would like to recognize consideration of committees. We did have a committee meeting. Ms. Fahey, I believe we had.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
The Planning, Land Use, and Economic Development Committee met on Wednesday, July 8th to discuss the bicycle master plan. Thursday, July 9th and July 6th to discuss ordinance 96120, a zoning amendment. And we also, on July 16th, discussed resolution 627120 regarding brownfields. Both of those, the resolution and ordinance remains in committee.
Thank you, Ms. Fahey. I don't believe we had any other committee meetings. I don't believe we did. Can raise your hand before I move on. Alrighty then. So now we're going to move to consideration of ordinances. Now, Mr. Anani.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed ordinance 137220R and I ask for its introduction.
Can the clerk please read the ordinance?
Yes, Mr. President. An ordinance amending Chapter 345 of Part 2 of the Code of the City of Albany regarding planting trees in the City of Albany.
Thank you. Mr. Kimbrough. Refer to the GGS.
General Services Committee.
Thank you, sir. Continuing on with consideration of ordinance, Mr. Anani.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed ordinance 1472.20 and ask for its introduction.
Can the clerk please read the ordinance?
Yes, Mr. President. An ordinance amending Chapter 313 and Chapter 258 of Part 2 of the Code of the City of Albany.
Mr. Kimbrough.
Also referred to General Services Committee.
Okay. And I believe that is the last ordinance, Mr. Kimbrough.
Rest are held. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Moving on to considerations of resolutions. Ms. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed resolution number 68.72.20R and ask for its introduction.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Yes, Mr. President. A resolution of the Common Council authorizing the City Treasurer's Office to enter the City of Albany into the New York Cooperative Liquid Asset Security System.
Thank you. Mr. Kimbrough?
Thank you, Mr. President. Referral to the Finance Committee.
Okay, and Ms. Fahey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice resolution 697220R and ask for its introduction.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Yes, a resolution of the Common Council reappointing Andre Lakes as a member of the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Ms. Kimbrough?
Thank you, Mr. President. Referred to the Planning Committee.
Thank you, sir. And continuing on with resolutions introduced, Ms. Fahey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice resolution 707220R and ask for its introduction.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Yes, resolution of the Common Council reappointing Peter Sheehan as a member of the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Kimbrough?
Also, thank you, Mr. President. Also referred to the Planning Committee.
Thank you. And Ms. Fahey, one more.
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice resolution 717220R and ask for its introduction.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Yes, resolution of the Common Council reappointing Tina Lieberman as a member of the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Kimbrough?
Thank you, Mr. President. That's a referral to Planning Committee, and the rest of the resolutions on the agenda are held.
Thank you. And because I missed over it in the agenda, the message from the mayor, we have to get that on the record. Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. President. We received a message, veto of ordinance 158119, and that message reads as follows. Dear City of Albany Common Council members, I am returning the Common Council without my approval, ordinance number 158119 as per section 302 of the City of Albany Charter. This ordinance was passed by the Common Council even though several procedural defects exist, making the ordinance invalid on its face as per the City of Albany Uniform Sustainable Development Ordinance, USDO, and state law, including lack of referral to the Albany County Planning Board prior to approval of the Common Council, a violation of New York State General Municipal Law, subsection 239-M, lack of any review pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act prior to approval by the Common Council, a violation of New York State Environmental Conservation Law 8-0101 through 8-0117, and lack of any review under section 375-5E 24C of the Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance, which sets forth specific standards that the Common Council must consider for zoning text amendments. These are the same procedural requirements that were the basis for my veto of another zoning amendment passed by the Common Council in March. I urge the Common Council to work more closely with staff from the Department of Planning and Development and Corporation Council to help avoid these repeated procedural defects in the future. Respectfully submitted by Mayor Sheehan, City of Albany.
Thank you. And unadvised of council, this will be dealt with at our next council meeting. Thank you. It moves us into miscellaneous part of our meeting. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will have to say this is one time that I want to go on record and in agreement with Marlon Anderson. The gun violence that has we've been experiencing has been, unacceptable, and we really don't have any conversation about it. I was talking to a young person from our community, and they were sharing how they feel they need to have a gun because people just riding up in cars taking shots at them. And when you listen closely, a lot of times it's people coming from other cities. So we have to send a message that the city of Albany is not a gun range. You can't just jump in the car and come over here and take shots at the residents, and it's okay. And I just think that we got to send a stronger message to that small group of people that are operating in our community, and people are waiting to hear some type of direction. I think if we look at the police, their hands are tied. A lot of people's hands are tied, and we got to put forth a better effort. So I agree with Mr. Anderson, and I just wanted to support his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Nani.
On this issue on gun violence, right? Like, I hear everyone talk about the problems. Like, we know what the problems are. But what I don't hear is anyone talking about solutions. Like my colleague just said, supporting Marlon Anderson's statement. What is the statement? So I think about what is the statement that he made? That we need to act. Okay. What is the solution? Instead of talking about the problems, why don't individuals who are interested in having a public safety meeting, reach out to the chair of the public safety meeting, or even organize a public safety meeting, type of Zoom meeting or some type of discussions. I just want to be very clear about something to all council members that are here. We know what the problems are. If you have an idea to solve that problem, let's have a real discussion. We're no longer advocate. We're elected officials. So it's easy to talk about the problems, but if anyone want to talk about the solution, I'm all for it. So if you want to have a town hall meeting in your district to talk about the violence that is plaguing our city, I'm all for it. If you want to call for more policing in your neighborhood, particularly the sheriff or whatever, we know what the problems are. Let's talk about the solutions. And very too often, people come here and talk about the problems from elected officials to advocates. I see advocates coming to the Common Council saying that we're not doing enough. But what I hate to see is elected officials saying that we're not doing enough. What are some of the ideas that you have planned? What are some of the things that you want to see? It's like, if this is so important to you, why don't you take a charge on this important matter? Why don't you take the lead on this important matter? So I just want to echo that, just share my frustration with many elected officials that talk about the problems. Let's talk about the solutions and take the lead on trying to solve some of these problems. So I just want to share that out there. Thank you.
Well, I would like to respond. I would like to respond to that. Clearly, what Mr. Anderson said, that is, he was looking for leadership. We've been, some of you that are new to the area don't understand that it was Albany that gun violence didn't exist in, and it was a bunch of parts of Albany that no longer exist that prevented us from having these type of problems. But when we start talking about funding for the softball field, some of our elected council people hear us when we champion our causes all the time. And it's funny how people jump back and forth, but when the camera is rolling, we get on here and we talk this solution stuff. Number one, it's people that's paid handsome money by taxpayers' dollars to assume responsibilities that aren't fully being assumed right now. So, when you hear the residents get up and speak about their concerns and their complaints, the finger shouldn't be pointed back at them for them to come up with solutions.
No, I'm talking about elected officials to come up with solutions. You are a leader, Derek. Why don't you have them muted?
Excuse me. I didn't interrupt you when you were talking. Please give me the same. Give me the same. I know what I am, and you don't have to explain to me what I am.
Yes, boss.
But the problem is the way you deal with stuff. That's why we don't have conversation like that. Because I have conversations with other people, and I am going to always do the things that's needed, regardless if I'm an elected official or not, because I care about people in the city of Albany. And so when people come to our, regardless if it's Mr. Anderson or whoever, when people come to our council meeting and they share their concerns, we shouldn't argue with them. And that doesn't mean that. It's just like when people come and talk about things that are important on New Scotland Road, we listen to them. And we should listen to anybody that comes from any other part of the city, because we should respect them for taking their time out to come participate with us. So, I'm not attacking anybody, but when you go through meetings and you don't hear anything about what's really going on in the city, that's problematic. We talking about the USDO, but we're not talking about lives being lost or, people scared to let their kids go out in front of their house. So, I'm not finger pointing, I'm not attacking anybody. And if you come and follow me and come down and see what the stuff that I'm attempting to do, because that's not for the public conversation. So, it's nothing personal. It's just that if he says something that makes sense, it's been shooting for 5 days in a row. I can't argue with Greg McGee on some of the points that he's making, because it's the truth. So, and when you say solutions, some of us know the answer to this stuff, but we're not saying what really needs to be said as elected officials. So, that's problematic. But listen, thank you for the conversation, Owusu.
I appreciate you, good brother. Anytime.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Anani. Mr. Hoey.
Yeah, just, there's not going to be one solution that's going to take care of this problem. But one of the things I'd like to see us, ask for help with where the guns are coming from. You just can't go into a gun store and buy a gun. So, there should be some way that we can ask for help, maybe with the FBI if they're coming from out of state, or, some kind of investigation. I mean, it's something we will bring up at public safety, but it's just, there isn't one solution, because there's many, there's a lot of problems.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. And I'm glad you said that. And after I give these remarks, I'll give it over to President Pro Tem. There is no one solution for this issue. But when we talk about gun violence and we hear council members, especially like Mr. Johnson, talk about the parks in their neighborhood not being taken care of, when we hear about activities in certain neighborhoods not being there any longer, those are part of the solutions to gun violence. And so when we look at those things, but we did 12 years ago, I believe now, maybe 13 years ago, the council, we started a gun violence task force. And the gun violence task force did deal with not just the gun violence, but it dealt with and gave recommendations to what we should do as a city during those gun violence, about the recommendations about how are we deploying resources was one of those issues. How are we tracking whether or not our state and our government, our local governments are tracking the influence of drugs coming into certain neighborhoods. But it was a detailed report. The report wasn't just based off of one solution. It had many things that should be done. And I think, so if we want to look at that, that is something we can definitely should dust off. I find it very, I was talking to a reporter a few weeks ago, and I told him, I see a lot of these things that we're dealing with today looking like we're going to have to dust off some of our other laws that we tried to get passed 12 years ago, but didn't, or 13 years ago, didn't get passed. But we did do a gun violence task force. And I think that's something we might want to look at, looking at really what those recommendations were back then and dusting some of those things off and making sure we continue to do those things. So, but I see Mr. O'Brien and then Mr. Ballard. Go ahead, Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on what you said. Dominic Casolaro was the driving force behind the legislation and the creation of the mechanisms, which I think lasted for maybe about 4 years.
4 years, yep.
In fact, I think we even had requirements for reports, and we got them.
Yep.
And they talked about the restorative justice process.
Yep.
And then, well, Dominic left the council, and I don't think anybody else really picked up that torch like he had done it. Maybe we could bring him into a meeting and kind of remind us of what was created and then fell apart. Apparently.
Yes, and there was many solutions in there. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, and I think that's where we can even begin to start. But Mr. Ballard and then Ms. Fredericks.
I think it's a frustrating issue for a lot of people because, like Tom said and Council President Ellis said, it's more than just one issue. I mean, the core, if you really want to get down to the core, it starts with poverty. It starts with lack of opportunity, lack of, economic elevation. I mean, that's a lot of at the core. If you want to try to address the issue, you have to address it right at the beginning. And right from when you have young people getting the skills, getting the opportunities to see more than they're, maybe exposed to. I had a conversation with someone over the weekend about how there are certain lawmakers on the federal level who want to call themselves law and order officials, people who will fight for law and order, people who want to support law and order, yet their lack of action when it comes to getting state aid and local aid to local economies have created a defunding motion. We had a meeting just last week that talked about how we've defunded our summer youth program, our police system, we're 57 officers down, our summer youth program, how these elected officials who put themselves law and order have really done everything. Their actions of lack of actions has really created an environment where we had to cut our summer youth program in half. Put down 57 officers, where our DGS is down over 40 staff members. So there's a trickle effect. When your neighborhoods aren't being cleaned, when your kids got nothing to do, when you don't have officers walking the beat, the effect of what's occurring. And it is very frustrating. It is very frustrating. And do what we can advocate to our federal officials. We can go outside with our weed killer and try to do the best we can to keep our neighborhoods clean. Because I do believe if you keep your neighborhood clean, just bring more pride to our neighborhoods. And we can talk to our young people. And we can talk to our neighbors. And we can talk to those who feel like picking up a gun is the only way to solve a problem. And tell them not to. Because it creates more negative ripple effects in our communities. And not just that, it does make it so people don't feel comfortable walking their neighborhoods. So it is a very complicated issue, but we have to be able to openly look at it in a holistic approach. There is no one solution to this. And if there was, not just our city, but all the other cities that are facing these issues would have already triggered it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fredericks?
Yeah, just to comment on the gun violence task force. So I did speak to Dom as well as JR, and that was introduced within the equity agenda that was passed by this body. So I think the next tangible step here is to have like a public safety meeting and just talk about the next steps we need to do to get that actively moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fredericks, for that. Mr. Nani?
Yeah, Mr. President, I just want to make it very clear. All I'm saying is this. If you are passionate about a specific issue, whether it's gun violence or whether it's poverty or it's municipal internet, you can take the lead on it. You shouldn't wait for the administration. You can't wait for other council members. All I'm saying is if somebody's really concerned about poverty, right, you should try to come up with a plan to address poverty and work with all of us as council members, if that is something that you are passionate and is near and dear to your heart. So I just want to make it clear, like, we are the legislative body for the city of Albany, and we can introduce legislation. We can, you know, put committees together. We can put task force together. We can do some of these things. But it's like, what I don't want to hear is people talking about it. Like, put pen and paper and take action. You know, Alfredo, you're talking about poverty, and, you know, we all been in this council. There hasn't been any single piece of legislation introduced to address poverty. So I just think that, you know, some of these things that we're passionate about, like, let's take action instead of just talking about it. Instead of talking about what other advocates are talking about, let's put pen on paper and let's take action and move forward. And if it's so passionate and near to your heart, you take the lead and let us follow your lead. And then all of us will come up with solutions. So that's all I'm saying. Like,
thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Nani.
I just would like to say in regards to taking the lead, like, we've been together for 3 years. You know, I've been in lead on a bunch of things, and, you know, I just say, where have you been with all of this, you know, conversation tonight? You know, and I want to also clarify that I never said that it was one solution. It's just that, you know, people come up and talk about Albany as they know it, and, you know, the Albany that we're living in is 2 different Albanies. So, like, you know, if you keep on ignoring people's concerns, you know, the stuff is snowballing, and then it doesn't go away. As Council President said, they were discussing this stuff 13 years ago, which I was a part of those gun violence meetings. So, you know, we were on the right track, and then we experienced some success, and we said we don't have to worry about it anymore. The problem's gone, and it doesn't work like that. So, moving forward, you know, we'll see what happens, but I think that when Mr. Anderson was speaking, he's expecting that the community shouldn't have to call a public safety meeting. The public safety meeting should be called by the chair. And I'm not calling out the public safety, but this is what the community is expecting us to react to the things that are going on in the whole community, not just parts of the community. Thank you.
And our last comment, Mr. Ballerin, and then we have, I'm going to recognize Ms. Farrell for Commissioner of Deeds. Mr. Ballerin.
I just want to say poverty is a huge concept to take on, and I think this council has taken on several elements on it. When we're talking about housing insecurity, when we're talking about rent control, I have spoken very loudly on that at the planning board level, at several hours and hours of planning board meetings to push for more housing for economically developing communities, push for more affordable housing. So that's just one element. And yes, and then you have economic development. And you will see something coming up in the next few weeks where I'm working with you right now about increasing the amount of minority and women-owned businesses with who we bond with and who we do business with on the city. So yes, there's multiple levels on this. There's no, again, poverty, there's no one solution. You have to be willing to take it on. And I'm more than willing to have any conversation with anyone on the subject, and I'm always open to any ideas that may come up, because I think we have to be open to listen to everyone. And I agree with Councilman Johnson. I do listen to every person that speaks on our public hearings. I listen, and I have actually agreed sometimes with some of the speakers that most times I don't normally agree with. But they deserve that time, they deserve that respect. And sometimes I think you can get some good ideas from people you didn't expect to get them from.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard.
Ms. Working all of you on this.
Ms. Fahey, Ms. Farrell, sorry. Ms. Farrell?
Can I just jump? I've been trying to get in for.
Yes, you can get in after the Commissioner of D.
I don't know how to raise my hand in this panel here.
Go to participants. You go to participants and click on there, and then you'll see, scroll over and it. But go ahead, Mr. Kimbrough.
Yeah, so with regard to the gun violence, obviously it's a passion and something I care about. We all care about this stuff, but being a retired police officer, I understand this stuff. I live right up the hill from North Albany. A number of the shootings that have occurred in the city have occurred down the hill. I'm got the chief on speed dial. I'm trying to work through these issues with him and trying to both give him ideas and get ideas from him on how they're, the steps that they're taking to deal with this stuff. It's not one thing that we can do. It's the poverty. It's jobs. We got to change the way people feel about each other. Picking up a gun to settle a dispute is simply unacceptable. And lastly, the Gun Violence Task Force, as the part of the equity agenda, I've had Michelle working in the last 2 weeks on. She pulled out the application, the old CFA for adding members to the Gun Violence Task Force the last time around. We're trying to tweak that to make it work for this. We're trying to figure out how we're going to add members to the task force. So that's probably been about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer than that Michelle's been working on that for us. So that's coming. I appreciate everybody's passion. I mean, we're all kind of got this thing going on here now. I don't know if this is really the venue for it, but in any case, I appreciate everyone's passion. We all care about this stuff. And it means it's important for all of us to get the gun violence down and taken care of. So with that, I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. Ms. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I offer the following persons be and hereby appointed commissioners of deeds for the city of Albany for the term ending in December 31st, 2020, and waive the reading of the names.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Kimbrough, let's get out of here.
You're muted.
Unmute yourself. We've been doing this for how many months now? There you go. You're unmuted, Mr. Kimbrough.
I am. Motion to adjourn.
Oh, second.
There's all that.
I'll unmute myself and you'll listen to my dogs barking. That's what
Okay.
That's why I do that.
Is there a second on the motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Michelle and JR.